Good afternoon, and welcome to the second of 3 workshops in the BMP Agricultural Stewardship Series with a focus on buffers, windbreaks, and wetlands. My name is Brendan Jacobs, and I am the Stewardship Specialist with the Raisin Region Conservation Authority, as well as the coordinator for the ALUS Ontario East program. I will be your host for today. Before we get going, I would like to thank everyone for filling out the pre-workshop survey. If you do not have a chance to complete the survey, we will share the link in the chat below. The workshop today will be recorded, as we hope to be able to make the recording available to folks who are not able to be with us today. As such, we ask that your cameras and microphones remain off throughout the duration of the presentations. We have 3 presentations for you today that will cover topics surrounding windbreaks and buffers, farmland wetlands, and agricultural stewardship. Today's presentations are pre-recorded to avoid some of the glitches that can happen over the course of a virtual workshop. We will begin the workshop by rolling through all of the presentations, after which there will be a question or discussion period. If at any point during the presentations you have a question regarding one of the topics, please type it into the chat box. We will compile the questions and endeavor to answer as many as we can live prior to the end of the workshop. If we run out of time, we will be happy to provide answers to you afterwards via email. Now let's get started. Our first presenter is Hayley Murray on the topic of windbreaks and buffers. Hayley's duties include administrative tasks for our 50 million tree program, such as coordinating with planting delivery agents, reviewing site plans, answering landowner inquiries, and working with our survival assessment team. Besides administrating the 50 million tree program, Hayley will be supporting Forestry Recovery Canada, the National Tree Planting Division, planting sites for our community tree planting events, and answering inquiries related to the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program. She will also be helping with the technical side of our Forest Ontario quarterly magazine by writing answers for Dear Sylvie, the column that answers questions on tree care and maintenance. Welcome, Hayley.
Hi everyone, my name is Hayley. I am the Forestry Operations Coordinator for an organization called Forest Ontario. I will get into more detail on what Forest Ontario does at the end of the presentation. I will mainly be discussing windbreaks and riparian buffers for this workshop that Raisin Region Conservation Authority is putting on today. So to get started, what is a windbreak? Windbreaks are rows of trees or shrubs that reduce the force of the wind. Windbreaks, shelter rows, living snow fences are all wind barriers. The specific name is paired with the objective and how the planting is designed. For example, a living snow fence is designed to reduce blowing and drifting snow. Field windbreaks are often used to shelter or protect fields and crops. So how do windbreaks work? Basically, as wind travels across open land, it picks up speed and force, causing various degrees of impact, from crop damage to poor visibility on roadways. Windbreaks reduce and redirect the wind, which changes the climate in the area they are protecting. So as you'll see from the diagram, wind's moving across an open space like a field. It hits the windbreak and the direction of that wind is changed, influencing the downwind side of the windbreak. OMAFRA, which is the Ministry of Agricultural, Food and Rural Affairs, often states that windbreaks will reduce wind speeds 10 to 15 times the height of the trees used in the windbreak, or shrubs, whatever vegetation is used. Height will vary based on the species chosen, the age, and the growing conditions of the site. Ooh, sorry. There we go. Okay, so what are the benefits of windbreaks? There's a very wide range of benefits. Some examples include shelter around buildings and roads, snow distribution, increase in crop yields, wildlife travel corridors, as well as reduced erosion, protection of livestock. They're nice to look at, and they can also increase land value. Now, I mentioned that downwind impacts of a windbreak depend on how it was designed. The biggest question when planning a windbreak is deciding what purpose you want it to serve. So organizations like Raisin Region have a tree planting program where they work with landowners on site to choose the right species, source the stock, prepare the site, complete the planting, and monitor the trees until they reach a certain age. And there's funding for programs like this through Forest Ontario, the 50 million tree program, which I will get into more detail about. Critical considerations at the planning stage include the density of the tree species you're going to be using, the orientation, the species, and spacing of the windbreak. So first off, density is key as it determines how much wind passes through the barrier. Density is controlled by species, spacing, number of trees in the row, or the overall width of the windbreak, and management, for example, pruning. Low, medium, and high density windbreaks all serve different purposes. Medium density windbreaks, for example, protect the largest area of land, which is best for crop yields. Medium density is also best for snow protection. High density windbreaks, they create a wall. If they're used in the wrong place, it creates turbulence, which leads to crop damage and erosion. The best use of a high density windbreak is to protect livestock, structures, roads, or to be used as a noise buffer or barrier. Okay, orientation. So downwind influence of a windbreak depends on tree height. For example, given a 10-meter high windbreak, it can influence the wind pattern 100 meters or so downwind. Where the windbreak is placed relative to what it is protecting is very important. A 30-meter setback is necessary when protecting buildings, livestock, roads, etc. You need to have the windbreak offset, not directly beside what you're trying to protect. Okay, spacing and species are very important as well. You need to choose the appropriate species for your site conditions, drainage, and the purpose you want the windbreak to serve. Conifers like spruce and cedar will have higher to medium densities, while deciduous or leaf-bearing trees will have lower densities. OMAFRA has many resources published to help guide species selection based on your soil type and drainage conditions. In this slide, there's an example here of windbreak density by species. And again, organizations like Raisin Region and forestry professionals can help plan and carry out these projects with you. When it comes to spacing, don't plant your trees directly beside each other. They need room to grow. Some standard spacing distances are listed here in the PowerPoint. As a minimum, you don't want to plant your trees closer than 1.8 meters between trees, as well as between rows. Staggered spacing is a common practice as it gives the trees more space to grow and form a healthy structure. It also accounts for maintenance in the future, including tree removal. A staggered windbreak won't leave a direct pathway for the wind if trees are removed. Again, this is another example of a resource that OMAFRA has in one of their best management practice guides on establishing tree cover. You're able to order a free copy of this roughly 100-page booklet off their website. Another Important consideration is tolerance to road salts. If your windbreak is close to a road or driveway, it could be exposed to salt spray. Certain species and more resistant to salt than others. Blue spruce, for example, has the greatest tolerance. Norway spruce is particularly popular as it has some salt resistance and it can also tolerate drought conditions, as well as it's typically faster growing than white spruce. White spruce has also shown some resistance to salt toxicity. Oop, went too far there. Okay, now in terms of maintenance, tree planting is similar to farming, for example, in that you can't just plant the trees, walk away, and expect incredible results. You need to manage the weeds, scout for pests, consider options during drought conditions if you want the best results. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it, just like anything. When the windbreak is establishing, dead trees should be replaced. Mowing between rows will help control weed competition. Herbicide treatments can also be used by registered professionals. Watering can be critical in the first year of establishment. Roots are very close to the soil surface, so drought conditions are very hard on the trees. It's recommended that newly established windbreaks are watered every 2 to 3 weeks during periods of dry conditions. Cover crops have become more popular as a site prep method for tree planting, especially clover, as it can reduce the weed competition and it also helps retain soil moisture. Pruning can help improve tree structure, removing dead trees or dying branches, as well as thinning maintains the desired density of your windbreak. It can also generate wood products if you're harvesting, say, firewood or saw logs down the road. It also allows the space for proper growth. You can often start to thin roughly 10 to 15 years after the trees have been planted. Okay, now to get into some more visual examples here. As you can see, there's white spruce in each of these photos, and starting in the top left, age 1 to age 4. These are all on different properties. It gives you an idea of the size of the seedlings when they're planted and how they progress. Note that all 3 of these sites have fantastic tending routines. The competing vegetation is kept low and the trees aren't smothered or restricted. The next slide here. These photos are from the same farm. It's a 3-row windbreak. You can see there's spruce on the row closest to the crops, poplar in the middle, and a mixture of trees and shrubs closest to the barn. The top row of photos here is around the time the trees were planted, within the first few years. They would have used larger stock like wire baskets for the poplar in the middle row. You can see the growth at year 6 on the bottom row, and there's a person in the bottom right picture, just for scale to see how well this windbreak is established. Okay, and then this last set of photos are some more mature windbreaks. So on the top left, we have a 15-year-old cedar windbreak that's capturing snow before it hits the road. Next, there's a 20-year-old cedar and pine windbreak along a field edge. And in the bottom, we have a 20-year-old white spruce windbreak that likely could use some thinning. It looks quite dense in that field there. Okay, so next I'm going to quickly jump into riparian buffers. So similarly to windbreaks, riparian buffers are rows of trees and shrubs along streams, creeks, rivers, lakes, any water course or surface water. The benefits of these planting types are filtering runoff before entering the water courses, erosion control, and habitat creation. Important considerations to make when you're planning this type of project are slope. The steeper slope, the greater chance of runoff and erosion. Wider buffers offer more protection. than narrower buffers. Soil is important as well. Sandy soil, you'll have more infiltration, whereas clay soils drain slower, so it's likely that more water will run off. A wider buffer gives more opportunity for water to infiltrate rather than run off directly into the stream, creek, or whatever you're trying to protect. Species considerations, you need to consider flood conditions often in the spring or fall and what species are able to withstand that. Grass is better for filtering and absorbing nutrients, and trees and shrubs are really good at stabilizing banks. So maintenance routines would be similar to what is required of a windbreak, but a few additional points to add. Don't let livestock graze in the buffer strip, as they'll enjoy feasting on the tasty little saplings and seedlings in there, which will prevent the purpose. And also don't fertilize or apply pesticides to a buffer strip. These are some examples of riparian species that will be suitable throughout Southern Ontario, depending on your objectives. Again, it's great to incorporate trees and shrubs where you can, especially along riparian buffers, as they provide different purposes as well as habitat and food sources for wildlife. Okay, so now getting into the 50 million tree program. So as I said, Forest Ontario is the organization who I work for. We administer the 50 million tree program. We have planted more than 34 million trees since the program started in 2008. More than 6,000 landowners have joined to plant with us, which is incredible. And as a result, over 17,000 hectares of forest have been created. Okay, so what is the program? The program offers funding support covering between 50 and 90% of the costs. To apply, you need to have enough space to fit at least 500 trees. Eligible project types are block plantings or afforestation, windbreaks, riparian buffers, and forest restoration. It is a full service program, meaning our partners like Raisin Region Conservation Authority conduct site visits with the landowner, develop a planting plan, coordinate site preparation and stock ordering. They plant the trees and they complete follow-up monitoring and tending. Landowners are required to enter a 15-year agreement, basically saying that you will not harm the trees that have been funded. But other than that, there are no specific requirements of the landowner. Okay, there's usually additional funding opportunities depending on your location and whether you have an environmental farm plan as a registered farm business. So 50 million funding can be stacked with other programs. So for example, it's common for counties to have rural water quality programs supporting tree planting. So you can often stack those funds together. ALUS, so alternative land use in the east of Ontario, often supports tree planting as well, and so does Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association. They have some grants as well. And that's it for me, so thank you all very much. If you have any questions or need to contact me, my information is in the corner of this slide, but otherwise I'll be here to answer a couple questions that come up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayley. Excellent presentation. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions for Hayley or any of the other presenters today, please type them into the chat box. Our next presenter is Chris Kinsley. Chris is an assistant professor of civil engineering at the University of Ottawa. He focuses his research on rural wastewater management and constructed wetland systems. Before joining University of Ottawa, he was a college professor at the Alfred and Ridgewood campuses of the University of Guelph. He will be speaking on the topic of farm wetland BMPs.
Wetland beneficial management practices, and I'll be describing 3 systems that we developed and or are monitoring in Eastern Ontario. Hi, my name is Chris Kinsley. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa, and I focus my research on rural wastewater management. Today I'll be speaking on farm wetland beneficial management practices, and I'll be describing 3 systems that we developed and or are monitoring in Eastern Ontario. So farm wetland BMPs. So objectives of implementing a wetland system in an agricultural setting. Well, the first one is water quality improvement, which is generally one of the main objectives. So we have sediment and attached to that organic matter, nitrogen and phosphorus is our main contaminants of concern. Wetland systems work in a variety of ways to remove or attenuate these pollutants. So we have sedimentation and filtration, which removes to a large extent the solid particles. We have plant uptake of nitrogen and phosphorus in the dissolved form, and we have bacteria that exist on the stems and in the sediment that are very effective at converting different forms of nitrogen. And finally, we have absorption of phosphorus onto the sediment soils. Now, driving forces as well are environmental regulations. We have the Nutrient Management Act, which specifies that farmers that have livestock operations or dairy operations must treat the runoff or the milkhouse wash water. So we'll be speaking to both of those sectors with examples. And then there's the more general Water Resources Act, which specifies that nobody can discharge deleterious substance into the environment. So that covers any sort of environmental water contamination from the farming sector. And then finally, we have the building code, which specifically in terms of the milkhouse wash waters, that would fall under a building code approval because the flow is less than 10,000 liters a day and it's attached to the building, so the milking parlor. So those are the 3 acts that most refer to environmental quality from the agricultural sector. And then finally, we have the ecosystem benefits. So more and more important, we're looking at flood protection and groundwater recharge. So balancing out the water balance on the farm, which as we see these larger precipitation events or more drought scenarios because of climate change, this could become more and more important. And then we have the added benefits of increasing wetland habitat and creating wildlife corridors. So advantages of the wetland systems, so capable of providing a high level of treatment, inexpensive to build, you can build it yourself if you have a backhoe basically, and self-maintaining and simple or inexpensive to operate. So these are the main benefits compared to other technologies. They take more space, but in an agricultural setting, we tend to have enough space. So first I'll talk about free water surface wetlands. This is what you classically think of as a wetland. So this is similar to natural marshes. These wetlands contain areas of open water. We have floating vegetation and emergent plants. So basically, depending upon the depth of the cells that you determine, you design, you'll get different plants developing. And we use berms, liners, and weirs to control the flow, and we'll line the system if we don't want infiltration. A lot of cases we may want some groundwater recharge, in which case then we use the native soil. So this is basically you have some excavation to do. The depth of the cells can range between 0.3 meters, so 1 foot, for a typical wetland cell, to 4 meters for a pond system, a deep pond. We'll have an inlet structure of some sort, or it could be the ditch running into your wetland system. It really depends on the scenario, and you'll need some sort of an outlet control. So it could be a weir or it could be a pipe controlling the water level. So the first wetland system that I want to talk about is a free water system. treating manure pile runoff and exercise yard runoff from the Hemdale Beef Farm in Increment, Ontario. So the source of the wastewater is the manure pile, and the exercise yard we see here. There's a concrete pad, and it all flows into this point here where we have a pump chamber. Pump chamber is for the research study, not necessary for most applications. Then we have a pond system, and followed by a wetland cell, and then a second pond. So we built the first 2 ponds, just an excavation. The first pond is 1.5 meters deep, and the second wetland cell is 0.5 meters deep. And here's a picture of the wetland cell in the fall. So really easy construction, took a day or so, and we used the native soil here, which had a high clay content, so there was very little infiltration. Now, after the second pond, we had two parallel studies to infiltrate the water back into the groundwater, and we used a vegetated filter, which is a picture here. This is basically a header pipe with the water flowing down a vegetated area. So there's design guidelines that are produced by OMAFRA for vegetated filters, and then the other option is what's called a flow path. And this is just the natural drainage pathway for the water. So we wanted to compare the two options. The system was very effective at reducing organic matter. Here we have COD and BOD, which are measures of organic matter. And you can see a sharp decline in both. Basically, the BOD was mostly removed in the wetland system, and the vegetated filter and the flow path were effective at further reducing the COD values to fairly low concentrations. In terms of phosphorus, so we have fairly high concentrations of phosphorus, so 25 milligrams per liter. Domestic wastewater would be around 4 as a means of comparison. Again, pretty good removal in the pond wetland systems. We bring it down to less than 10, and then very good further reductions in the soil vegetated filter and flow path, so down to 1.5. So this is a very encouraging result in terms of phosphorus. And in terms of nitrogen, also very, very positive results. So we have very high nitrogen concentration in the runoff, so 140 milligrams per liter. This would compare to 40 milligrams per liter in domestic wastewater. So then again, we're down to around 39 at the end of pond 2, and better treatment in the vegetated filter in this case to the flow path, but good removal in both cases. So here we're down to 1.5 and 7.5 milligrams per liter at the end of the flow path, or 38 meters into the flow path, I should say. The flow path continued on for quite a distance. That's the length at which we monitored it. So both systems worked fairly well, and we reduced a lot of the nitrogen contamination. The next system I want to talk about is another free water surface system. This is for a grain farm in St. Isidore, Ontario, at the RRCA farm. So this was a natural ravine, and the farmers, the farm family, decided to work with Ducks Unlimited to create a wetland habitat in their farm. So we have here a series of ponds that were created by creating a dike and a spillway at the outlet of the system here. Here you can see the picture of the first pond, which is quite shallow, and one of the deeper ponds. So the ponds varied from less than 0.5 meters to close to 4 meters in depth throughout the system. And the system occupies 0.4 hectares and accepts drainage from 54 hectares of farmland. So this system is treating the tile drainage waters from this farm. So the construction project was more involved here because you had to build quite a large dike across the ravine, which required permits because of the height of the dike required it based on provincial law. And you can see the impoundment behind. So this was designed by Ducks Unlimited, and here's a picture of the dike and the spillway. So we conducted a fairly comprehensive study of the system. I'm presenting here 2018 results. So first I want to talk about TSS. This is suspended solids. We had a reasonably high concentration of 40 milligrams per liter coming into the pond system. It increased in the first pond because it's very shallow, so we're picking up algae and other plant detritus in the samples, and after that it declined. So by the end of pond 5, we had 70% reduction of suspended solids. As we expect, these systems are very effective at removing particulate matter. Now, in terms of nitrogen, we have some very positive results, close to 50% reduction of nitrate, a little lower for total nitrogen. So we're getting good denitrification in the system. And this is tied to a number of the research questions. Under what conditions can we optimize the denitrification in these natural pond wetland systems? Nitrate is typically quite high in drainage waters from agricultural land. Here you can see we're 7-8 milligrams per liter, which is fairly typical of what you see from tile drainage in the region. Phosphorus, we had about a third removal of total phosphorus and less so of the dissolved phosphorus. This is expected. The solids component of the phosphorus settles out with the suspended solids, and that's probably what we're seeing here. We are seeing some removal of the dissolved phase as well, which is encouraging. So horizontal subsurface flow wetlands, this is the second type of wetland that I want to talk about. This is particularly useful when you have an effluent that flows year-round. So we have wintertime because the water flows below the gravel surface, so, and does not freeze as long as you have a pretty consistent flow. They consist of gravel in a lined bed. So we basically will excavate 0.6 to 0.7 meters. Here we have our lined bed. We have an inlet pipe. We have coarser gravel at the inlet, and then medium gravel in the middle. It has to be washed gravel, so we don't have fines. Then we have an outlet control structure to maintain the water flow. So this type of technology is particularly applicable for the milk house wash waters because we have a source of wastewater that is flowing year-round. You have to remove the large solids prior because they will clog the inlet zone. So we have a series of either ponds or, in our case, septic tank and grease trap to remove the solids prior to the wetland cell. And benefits, again, is that the water stays below the surface, so you can operate them year-round. So in this example, we are treating milkhouse wash waters with a subsurface flow wetland. We start by looking at the concentrations of wash waters. So they are typically 10 times higher than what we'd expect from domestic strength wastewater, so septic tank effluent. And therefore, conventional septic systems have failed in the past when treating milkhouse wash waters. There's two sources of wash water depending on the technology used at the dairy farm. So we have the more conventional parlor with you see the milk lines here that are rinsed after each milking, and that's what produces the wastewater, which has waste milk as well as the cleaning products, including phosphoric acid. And we have the more, I guess, modern now robotic milkers, which is the same process, only one cow walked into a robot at a time. So there's slightly different volumes of water based on the technology, but basically the concentrations are very similar. So here, this is the system that we have designed, and we have 5 of these now operating throughout Eastern Ontario. We have a septic tank followed by a grease trap to remove the solids and the milk fats prior to the wetland cell. And then we have our cell itself, which is just a lined bed with 0.6 to 0.7 meters of gravel. We have an outlet, the liner we just make into an outlet weir so the water flows by gravity into a conventional leaching bed, which is designed according to Ontario Building Code requirements. So in terms of the construction then, pretty straightforward. We installed septic tank, grease trap, excavated with an excavator or a hi-ho, the bed. In this case, we put a layer of sand, so maybe 10 centimeters of sand down to protect the liner because there was rocks in the soil. And then purchase the liner the size we wanted. It comes in a roll, you just unroll it, so it's pretty straightforward. Fill the basin in with gravel, so 1/2 inch clean gravel, and then plant native wetland plants from local ditches. So they're typically Phragmites or cattails. And then this is the final result, the operating wetland. So in terms of performance, we had very good removal. Our objective is less than 200 milligrams per liter because that is what is a typical septic tank effluent quality. As you can see here, we're below 100 on the wetland outlet with influent between 1500 and 2500. So we had very good removal of organic matter, and again, very good removal of TSS, so less than 150. So we're meeting the requirements for both BOD and TSS. In terms of nitrogen and phosphorus, we're looking at between 33 and 50% removal of nitrogen and about a third removal of the phosphorus. That's mostly the organic fraction, so the nitrogen and phosphorus tied to solid particles that are removed in the sedimentation tanks and filtered in the wetland itself. So the soluble nutrients pass through the system to a large extent, and that is the active research that we're doing now, is to improve these systems to address more fully the nitrogen and phosphorus, although it is not required to get a permit to install one of these systems. The building code is interested in organic matter and solids at this point in time. So I'd like to acknowledge the funding bodies for these studies over time, and particularly OMAFRA with Anna and Benoit Lebeau, who have been deeply involved in these studies over time, and also the farm cooperators, who obviously are essential to this research and have all been very, very helpful. And finally, the students who do all of the work in collecting the data and analyzing it through their master's and PhD studies. So are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Excellent presentation. For our third and final presentation today, I'd like to introduce myself, Brennan Jacobs. I am the Stewardship Specialist at the Raisin Region Conservation Authority and the coordinator for the ALUS Ontario East program since 2012, when the program first started in Eastern Ontario as a pilot program. Today, I'll be introducing you to the ALUS program and the stewardship projects we partner with local farmers to complete. Good day and welcome. Thank you very much for being here today. The presentation will start with an overview of the ALUS Ontario East program, and then we'll delve into some of the individual projects we've had the pleasure of partnering with local farmers to complete. ALUS is a community-developed, farmer-led and delivered program with a simple vision: to work with farmers to augment ecosystem services on their lands. The projects that we complete through the ALUS program in partnership with the agricultural community increase soil health, water quality, reduce erosion, and create habitat for wildlife. Every ALUS program is guided by 8 principles and overseen by a partnership advisory committee, or PAC, that is predominantly made up of members from the farming community. For every acre enrolled in the ALUS program, the farmer receives an annual payment per acre for the management and maintenance of the project. This ensures that the projects mature and function as planned. You can see here a list of the ALUS principles, including community developed and farmer delivered. We look to target marginal and fragile areas and not take full farms out of production. The program is voluntary, easily integrated into other existing stewardship programs run by local community groups or agencies, and we are accountable. 10% of our projects per community are independently audited every year to ensure that the payments the landowners receive are accurate. With many different communities throughout Canada, including 8 here in Ontario, The first in Ontario was Norfolk in 2007, and Ontario East came on in 2012 as a pilot project. Ontario East works within the Raisin South Nation Source Protection Region and is based out of Cornwall, Ontario. We are the only watershed-based community in Ontario, and that helps with our goal of maintaining and restoring watershed health across our landscape. The type of projects that we look to work with farmers on is infinite. We don't have a specified list, and if you can dream it, we could probably help implement it on your farm. So this list here as seen on the screen is just an example of some of the types of projects we do work with. Wetland restoration, enhancement, native grasslands, woodlot expansion or establishment, erosion control, infield and along watercourses, livestock inclusion. And for a lot of these projects, we do add habitat structures because it does add diversity to the habitat and helps them mature a little bit faster by adding some of these structures that would be normally found within a mature natural environment. We add in things like bird boxes and nesting structures for waterfowl and cavity nesting birds, along with turtle basking platforms in our wetland projects. We have a very simple approach to projects. We want them to be sustainable, meaning that they need to be sustainable on the farm, meet the farmer's needs and requirements, as well as not interfere with their operation. We would like them also to be sustainable environmentally, meaning that that they're best suited for the area in which they are being established. We're always looking for innovative type of projects. So again, as I said, if you could dream it, we hope that we could work with you to establish it on your farm. We want our projects to have both agricultural benefits and ecosystem benefits, and we're always looking for different partnerships to help establish and maintain our projects on the landscape. The more partnerships, the more ideas can be brought forward, the bigger and better the projects can be, and the less of a burden there may be to the farmer in the establishment of these projects. So that was a little bit about the program. I'm now going to go into a little more detail regarding some of our projects. We'll look at some riparian and buffer and erosion control projects, some tree planting projects, wetland projects, and grassland projects. So erosion control projects can take on many forms, from riprap or bioengineering along the banks to grass waterways and associated control structures such as tidal drain outlets, wascobs, hick and bottoms, and those type of structures that help reduce infield erosion and ponding and pooling. The sketch here you see on screen is a generalization of erosion control along a bank of a municipal drain or watercourse. For these type of projects, we do ask that a 10-foot buffer be maintained from the top of the bank, and this is to reduce bank compaction, maintain its integrity, and reduce slumping over time. The weight of the machinery along the top of the bank can cause the banks to erode more rapidly, and as well to reduce the efficacy of the erosion control that was put in place. So here's one example. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, here's my arrow, where the bank scour was so great every year that it was actually washing out and undercutting large sections of the bank on a yearly basis during the spring freshet. Those areas would then slump into the river over time, and the farmer was slowly losing large chunks of his field into the Burnett River. So the solution for this was to place riprap along the slope of the bank. We sloped the bank back, added riprap, and then there's a 10-foot grass buffer along the top of the bank just to maintain the integrity of the top of the bank, as well as filter out any nutrients or sediments that may be coming off the field at that point. This is a larger erosion control project up in Ottawa area along the South Castor River. This project is 26 acres in size and included converting large section of the agricultural fields, which were in floodplain, to a permanent hayfield. This was included into the program, and so the farmer does receive a payment for this hay buffer. However, they are able to cut it 1 to 3 times a year, depending on what they would like for their operation, and then use that hay on farm or sell it as they see fit. As you can see in the pop out here, we have again, erosion control riprap on the top of the slope and erosion control blanket along the top. These areas were then seeded with a forage mix, and then planted with shrubs to help maintain the top of the slope. Over time, this project will help to reduce nutrient loading into this area of the Scotch River, this reach of the Scotch River. As it is floodplain, the river does quite often overtop its banks in the spring here. So by putting this into permanent cover, the farmer is able to reduce the amount of topsoil loss into the Scotch River itself. Setbacks are an excellent way to increase your overall average yield, reduce the amount of inputs you are putting into areas in your fields where you are not receiving a yield or any type of positive yield anyway. And a great way to maintain natural features on your farm. So we typically do these type of projects along water courses, so they could be riparian setbacks or along the edges of woodlots and windbreaks. This sets back the crops from those natural features, and we seed them in with a grass seed mix that is easily maintained over time. And this reduces the amount of nutrient loading, erosion, and at the same time allows these natural features, these natural mature features such as the windbreaks, and to be maintained and function as they should in promoting both on-farm health and watershed health. As I mentioned, we're always looking for different types of innovative projects. Silvopasture and agroforestry are sort of one section that we're very intrigued with, and are happy to participate with landowners to implement on their farms. Here in Zone 1, we did implement with the farmer a silvopasture area, which consists of rows of white pine, sugar maple, and black locust. And then, so they were, twin rows, so 2 rows, and then a large gap was placed between the 2 rows. So you have enough room there that the machinery can be brought in to cut hay, or that when the trees start to mature, that livestock can be brought through to graze. The trees then, once mature, offer the multiple services. They provide shade for the livestock. They can provide a food source for the livestock in the form of the legumes that come from the black locust trees. There's also lumber that could be taken off of these strips over time for use on farm or for sale as they're managed over time. We also have a mixed forest plantation here that included wildlife shrubs. And at the end of the field here in Zone 5, which was sort of a perpetually wet area that could only be cut for hay or pastured on really dry years, we were able to work with the landowner to put in a cloverleaf pear pond wetland to promote wetland habitat for various birds and wildlife. One thing that I like to incorporate into our tree planting projects are the possibility of edible native species. So many of our native species are edible and could potentially provide specialty or local markets with product for sale or for use in the end as part of an end product, such as jams or pies or baking or different culinary end products in restaurants. Windbreaks and hedgerows are great ways to decrease erosion, increase infiltration, and create heat islands to promote the growth of crops. Through the ALUS program, we can help identify species of value and help you develop hedgerow windbreak management plans for your farm. We can also enhance these existing features with either setbacks or interplanting of species that could potentially provide a crop down the road. Different species of fruiting wildlife shrubs, fruit shrubs, nut trees, fruit trees that are native to Ontario. So you can see here on the you have a butternut tree here, black elderberry, maybe black elderberry coulis, fruit leather, pies, sumac. In many cases thought it was a weed, but does make excellent as part of different culinary dishes, including sangria in the form of sumacade or in jelly form. In terms of wetland restoration, we do many different types of wetlands with different farms. It all depends on what the end goal of the farmer is and what the landscape surrounding the area of the site is. This is a parent-pound type wetland. This one's offline. It was constructed to filter runoff prior to entering the Raisin River. Tile drainage outlets into the pond, and surface water runoff is directed towards the pond so that the wetland can then filter out any nutrients or soil particles prior to it being released over a spillway into the Raisin River. We also buffered the area with a grass clover mix and planted a number of different native shrub species around it to help with infiltration and the uptake of nutrients. At the same time, it does increase habitat diversity on the farm. So here's a diagram of what the actual concept was, where you have sheet flow or runoff flows over surface directed towards the pond, the tile outlets entering the pond. So this now gives time for the water to settle out, for the vegetation that's going to establish in the pond to uptake those nutrients prior to water being released over the spillway into the pond, into the river itself. We also work on headwater type wetlands. These wetlands are generally online and help to improve water quality, filter trout, drain, and surface runoff, restore wetland habitat, and reduce peak flows while increasing the water table. We're also able to, and particularly on this project, we were able to seed in partnership with the farmer, a number of different species for pollinators. So it became a pollinator-friendly buffer, and then further partnered with the local conservation authority, South Nation, and school groups to plant an edible buffer on the farm as well. So that a strip of it is now planted in edible native fruit and tree species. So this is a picture right after the spring after construction took place. And then this is that same, later on that same summer after construction. You can see how rapidly the area regenerates itself and becomes a diverse habitat. We do many types of grassland projects, but one that's really interesting is to promote grassland areas for nesting bird species, one of them being the bobolink. I'm sure many of you have heard of the bobolink. It is an endangered species, but there are many different other species of grassland nesting birds as well that will benefit from delayed cut or delayed grazing. This is just one type of project that we do through the ALUS program in terms of grassland habitat. We also look at restoring pastures and hayfields so that they can be converted to delayed cut or delayed grazing. So that maybe changing up the species mix found within or enhancing the species mix found within. We could also look at converting either former pasture hayfields or cropland to native grassland species as well, if that is something that is interest to the farmer. So just before we end, some projects to consider: agroforestry, silvopasture, different types of erosion control, pit and mound wetlands, native orchards or edible forests, looking for beaver baffle projects. That's where beavers have flooded out agricultural areas. We're looking to do some pilot projects where we could install baffles in those dams to see how they would function as wetland type projects and how they would function in terms of those effects on the agricultural operation. We're also looking to enhance or restore wildlife corridors throughout the landscape in partnership with the two conservation authorities and the counties for their natural heritage strategy that is coming down. And now I have a short video clip to show you just as a bit of an introduction to the program prior to ending the presentation.
I remember my grandpa, when he did those dishes on that farmland, he was not doing for money, but for the next generation. Now we need to ask ourselves, if I'm growing that crop, did I pollute? Where is going my residue?
There's been an uptake in establishing and working with ecosystem services on farms and how they can improve the health of their farm while at the same time improving the health of the landscape on an environmental level. When ALUS Canada expanded in Ontario, we started off as a pilot program. One of the reasons why it's been so successful, I think, is just the way it's set up. You know, it's science-based, it's voluntary, community-based, farmer-led and delivered.
Sometimes as a farmer, you don't have much time. ALUS, it's a very simple system.
We're going to try to get some more trees established for erosion facts. If it's not really going to cost us a lot of money in the end of the day, I definitely don't have problems trying to help out the environment.
We have all different types of landowners and farmers involved in the program, from large cash crop producers to market farmers. There's just a diversity of folks that are interested in establishing these natural features on their farms. What we want to be doing is working with the landowners on those areas where it's either fragile, it's marginal, they're not getting a great yield from it. You know, the areas that are on the edges, to put in things like these wetlands, these buffers, and the projects are always designed in a way that's best suiting them and their operation. It's something that you're going to be proud of and that you want to see on your farm.
You know, if you're growing food, you're doing, yes, for money, but we have to go further than that.
All right, well, thank you very much for listening to the presentation, and I hope to answer any questions you have come the question period at the end. Thank you. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed today's presentations. I'm now going to hand the floor over to Jamie, my colleague at the Raisin Region Conservation Authority. She'll be moderating the Q&A period. So I know there's quite a few questions that have come into the chat. So if I'll pass it over to you, Jamie. And
All right, thank you, Brandon. Thank you. And thanks for the wonderful presentation. You did a great job. So now I'll just go through the questions that were posted in the chat. But in the meantime, if anybody has any more questions, feel free to add to that chat. All right, so our first question is there a way to get the presentation slides on PDF? Then, so yes, there would be. We can send that to you after this presentation. I'm just going to write down quickly who asked for this. Our next question in the meantime is from Jackie. What constitutes a high density windbreak? So let's see, Hayley, are you still on? Would you like to take that question?
Hey, sure. I'm hoping as we went on that maybe was resolved, but in like a high level, non-technical explanation, it would be looking at the specific species and the width of your windbreak that would influence the density. So picking tree species like cedar, spruce, opposed to deciduous trees that have more permeability, that would influence your overall density. From a more like technical standpoint, OMAFRA has some guidance on looking at light levels permeating through a windbreak to help you gauge what density you're at if you're trying to reduce or increase the density of your windbreak. I can try and post that guide in the chat here if anyone's interested in looking into that in more detail.
Thank you, Hayley. So I'm just reading the next question here. So I believe, Hayley, you may have answered this already. In terms of whether the 15-year requirement of the landowner to maintain the funded trees, is it transferable if the land is sold? Hayley, you mentioned that the 15-year agreement is only tied to the landowner who plants the trees. So if you sell your property, the agreement is not transferred to the landowner. And Jackie, in terms of your question about that, I believe that we may be able to send you an email regarding that instead of answering it here, just because it seems very, very pointed, very, no, I can't remember the word. Anna.
Specific.
Yes, very specific. Thank you. All right. Anna is leaving, and that looks like all of the questions for today. All right. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to even unmute if you want to do that, or send something in the chat.
There was a question sent to me directly.
Okay.
So I can answer that one now, just in terms of one of the pictures that came up in the ALUS presentation, the first erosion control project that I showed, where we had rip-wrapped the edges of the banks of the Boudet River there. The question specific was in the pic where the water's edge was being eaten up by the water. Is there some planting that could have been done instead of filling with rock and gravel? And in general, we do try to maximize the potential for bioengineering. So that would be a mixture of, hardened structure with vegetation component, specifically doing projects with fascines or different plantings along the bank or down the slope of the bank. However, in areas where the water force or the ice scour is too great, unfortunately, it doesn't give an opportunity for that vegetation to really take hold. And often what will happen is we'll lose those plantings. So the ice will shear off, the tops of the plants in the water. Force of the water will continue to erode the bank and eat out the root system that would be there before the plants really have a chance to establish. So in areas where you do have a high volume of water rushing through or a lot of force going through that area, we do tend to use rock at the toe of the slope, at the very least, to help hold that part together. And then farther up the bank where those forces aren't as great on the vegetation, we do tend to try and maximize the amount of plant material that is used in different forms of planting and different species. So that could be shrubs, trees, different ways of using different bioengineering technique, live staking of the scenes and stuff to try and maximize the benefit of the vegetation to the waterway itself.
Excellent. Thanks, Brendan, for the explanation. Did you want to speak on our closing statement, sir?
Yes, I can. Yep. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. I'd also like to remind everyone who's interested in implementing best management practices on their farms that the Agri-Action Advisory Service application deadline was extended until August 16th. So you still have a few days left to apply. And I encourage everyone considering taking advantage of this funding to go to the program's website or webpage and fill out the forms that are available there for the Agri-Action Advisory Service. I would like to ask everyone to also please fill out the post-workshop survey that will be circulated to you shortly. This will help us greatly fine-tune potential future workshops. And additionally, we will also be sending out to you at the same time links to the presentations that were given over the course of the workshop today and last week as well. I would also like to thank Hayley and Chris for sharing their knowledge with us today. And special thanks, of course, to our partners. This workshop series is supported by the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, a 5-year federal, provincial, and territorial initiative, and by ALUS Canada, which is a community-developed farmer-led and delivered program that works with farmers to produce valuable ecosystem services on their farms. Once again, thank you for everyone for participating today, and I wish everyone a great rest of the day and hope to see you at next week's workshop. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.